Sahara, can you hear me?
You are now muted.
Okay, Sahara, you're not responding. Where is Boaz? Where is Evelyn? Anybody who has any information about them? Belladine. Hilda. Hilda Kimemia. Can you hear me? Kimemia Hilda? Okay, you're saying yes. Where is Evelyn? Where is Evelyn? Belladine, where is Boaz? And I think Asha. Anybody who has any information about them? Sahara is also lost. So if you're still together, you can write in the public chat so that we can start our class now. If you can still hear me, just put it in the public chat. You can just say if you can get me very well so that we can start. You're not responding. I want to get you from the public chat. Are we together, Rita? Are we together, Achieng? Because I've seen Kimemi has said she can hear me. What about you, Rita? Just say yes or write something in the public chat so that we may start. Okay. Rita, you're saying yes. Odwor? I want to see you writing in the public chat. Okay. Adwar is also saying she can hear me well. So what I want us to, you can still continue communicating to Evelyn. We are having Boaz, Belladine, and is it Asha and Leon? Ask them to come in so that we can be together. You can just text them to join the session. So I have the shared notes. I've already shared notes with us, so we can follow it together as I discuss. So this unit is our fourth semester's unit. It is called Diplomatic Mission and Consular Practice. Diplomatic Mission and Consular Practice. So the first thing we have to define basic terms, which the first term is diplomat, a diplomat. So we want to first understand, because it is diplomatic mission and consular practice. So who is a diplomat, or what is a consul? So first, a diplomat is someone who is appointed by the nation state to represent and protect that nation's interest abroad. So someone who is appointed by a nation. So it's like the Kenyan nation, we're able to appoint somebody to represent and protect our interest abroad. So this is somebody who is going to represent us in another nation. That's what we're talking about, abroad, and is going to represent and protect our interests there. So Sahara, I can see you. You're back. Just text if you can hear me well through the public chat. So a consul is also an official representative of the government of one state in the territory of another state. So a consul is also an official representative of the government of one state in the territory of another, normally acting to assist and protect the citizens of the consul's own country and to facilitate trade and friendship between the people of the two nations. So also you find that a consul is an official representative of the state they are from to another state. So they're representing, if it is the Kenyan state, in the US. So they're representing our interest, the interest of the Kenyan citizen in the US, but they're from Kenya. So that is a consul. Remember, consul is somebody who is below a diplomat, because a diplomat is just a general word. So a consul is a representative too, but you're going to see that rank later. So here in the introduction, So we are told that the course combines theoretical and practical knowledge of diplomacy as a sub-discipline of international relations. It gives students the possibility to comprehend, analyze, and applicate contemporary methods and techniques of diplomatic practice. By combining practical and theoretical classes, students are given the opportunity to follow the evolution of diplomacy, its techniques and modes, as well as critically analyze modalities of using diplomacy in conflict prevention and conflict resolution. So that is just a small introduction. It's all about what we're going to cover, talking about the evolution techniques, the skills. We want to understand what do diplomats do, what do consuls do at the end of the this unit. So I want us to go directly to the definition of diplomacy, because that is what is very major here, to the definition of diplomacy. So we are told that there is no general definition of diplomacy which we can embrace. There is no one. Like I always tell you that we maybe in this class you are 10, all of you can become scholars, so all of you can be able to define diplomacy depending on how we believe on how we understand diplomacy. So there is no one general definition of diplomacy. So consequently, there are as many definitions of diplomacy as there are writers on the concept. So as many writers we have, as many definitions of diplomacy we are going to have. However, in this unit, we are concerned with the basic definition of diplomacy by relevant authorities of diplomacy. So this is in order to have a good fundamental understanding and knowledge of diplomacy and diplomatic relations among nations. So Random House Dictionary, that is the first one that we're going to get. Random House Dictionary defines diplomacy as the conduct by government officials, negotiations and other relations, the art of science of conducting such negotiations, skills in managing negotiation, handling of people so that there is little or no ill feeling. So according to Random House Dictionary, it defines diplomacy as the conduct by government officials of negotiations and other relations between nations. So because you all know that diplomacy can only occur when you have relations between nations. So when you already have relation between nations, that is when now diplomacy can come in, so that we can have negotiation on how we are able to handle each other. So wherever we are having anything, maybe Kenya, Tanzania, we're having issues, the only way we can solve is through a platform of diplomacy. So that is the only way, so that we can negotiate. If there is an ill feeling, we can be able to understand. And those people who are negotiating are representatives of the government. So the English lexicon defines diplomacy as the management of negotiations by negotiations. So that is the second definition. The lexicon defines diplomacy as the management of negotiation by negotiation. So you manage negotiations using negotiation. So you want to negotiate, and the only way to manage the same is to negotiate. So the tactic, by that, these relation square measures adjusted and managed by ambassadors and envoys, the business or art of diplomacy. So we have ambassadors. You all know that we're having those who represent our government. We can talk about ambassadors and other envoys. So if we're having a business issue, so we are going to send our representative, we are going to send our ambassadors, those who are going to represent our nation outside there. So we continued looking at another definition. Sir Ernest Satow asserts that diplomacy is the application of intelligence and tact, to the conduct of officials' relations between the governments of independent states. Sahara, could you please mute your microphone? Sahara, kindly mute your microphone. So Thank you. Sir Ernest Sato assert that diplomacy is the application of intelligence and tact to the conduct of officials' relations between the governments. So you find that according to him, he says that you have to apply intelligence, you have to apply tact, which is very, very key. Without intelligence, without tact, you cannot be able to win in any negotiation. So I remember these states. We are told that. Between the governments of independent state. So it should be between the government of independent states. So if you're not independent, it is very hard for you to engage in diplomacy because you're talking about between the governments of independent state, extending sometimes also to their relations, extending sometimes to their relations with vassal states, or briefly still the conduct of business between states by peaceful means. So, according to Sato, he refers this diplomacy as peaceful because it is negotiation. Wherever something is going wrong, you come up with a peaceful negotiation between independent states so that you can be able to solve the same. So, according to Adams Watson, on the other hand, he believes that the diplomatic dialogue is the instrument of international society, civilized process based on awareness and respect for different people's purpose of view. So, according to Adam Watson, he believes that diplomatic dialogue is an instrument. So, diplomacy or diplomatic dialogue is an instrument whereby we're talking about international society. When you and another, maybe your friend, are having issues, you cannot engage in diplomacy. Diplomacy is only between nations. So, that is, we're talking about international society, a civilized process based on our Yes, I am back. Hello. I was lost because of internet connection issues, but I'm back. Uh, so I was somewhere here. Let me go back to the shared notes. We were talking about the definition according to Adams, not Adams. We had talked about Adams. We were talking about we had talked about Adams, I think so, but I can go back there so that we can get wherever we were. So, like Adam Watson, he said that he believed that diplomacy dialogue is an instrument. Like I said, it is, and I agree with him. It is an instrument whereby it is between international society, between Kenya and Uganda, between Kenya and the US, between Kenya and China. And it is a civilized process whereby it is something civilized. It is something that is based on awareness and respect. Because we respect China, we don't want to engage in war with them, or China does not want to engage in war with Kenya. So they engage in a dialogue and they use a platform called diplomacy. So because the continuous exchange of ideas and attempt to find mutually accepted solution to conflicts of interest increase that awareness and respect. Because we are talking about continuous exchange of ideas. So countries are exchanging ideas, or we are coming up with new ways of doing things, and this is out of exchange of ideas and attempt to find mutually acceptable solution. So we want to have mutually accepted solution between Kenya and China, so we come together in a table where we're talking about diplomacy and we negotiate. So some leading diplomats and scholars of international relations have used the word diplomacy to mean the practice of international legal principles and norms in international relations. So we are told that some leading diplomats or scholars, they talk about this diplomacy to mean practice of international legal principles and norms, because we are going to see that we have legal principles that guide these diplomatic mission, that guide these negotiations. So we're going to look into them. So we go on. Although diplomacy might be described as a complex and delicate instrument that measures forces working at epicenters of international relations, the subtle measures of diplomacy can be used to arrest, ameliorate, or reduce, discard misunderstanding and disagreements which precipitate international crisis. So we are told that this diplomacy is complex and delicate instrument because we're talking about issues that can lead to war. So you want to talk about them in a table and you want to reduce them. You want to arrest them so that it does not maybe go overboard. Any disagreement between Kenya and Tanzania, for example, let us talk about the issues on a table, which is diplomacy. So you find that it is very complex and delicate, because if you're having too much differences, or if you cannot be able to manage the negotiation, it can lead to war. We're going to see on the same. Odor Acheng, could you kindly mute your microphone? There's some background noises. So you find that it is very complex and it is delicate, this negotiation. If you don't handle them well, it can cost a country largely. Let us continue. Diplomacy is often thought of as being concerned with peaceful activity, although it may occur within war or armed conflict. So it is concerned with peaceful activity. So when you're negotiating, mainly you're focusing on peace. There is no way you can negotiate and then your focus is something else. Mainly is peace. You want to find peace. You want to have peace between the nation. So although it may occur within war, so when countries are conflicting, you can come now on a table and say, let us negotiate. It can occur within war or armed conflict. So it can occur within war, but its major purpose is peace. So the blurring of line, in fact, between diplomatic activity and violence is one of the developments of not distinguishing modern diplomacy. The point can be made more generally in terms of widening the content of diplomacy. Certainly, what constitutes diplomacy today goes beyond the definition, which sometimes rather narrow political strategy conception given to the term. So you find that this diplomacy, like I said, we don't limit. It can occur in the political context. It can occur in the economical context. It can occur in the cultural context. So you can negotiate over so many issues in that table. So it is not only maybe issues of politics. It is not only issues of economics. It can occur maybe when you want to have something in common. So the issue of maybe trade, the issue of maybe a certain culture, the issue of certain laws. So it can occur in different contexts, and it is widening because we are having many issues nowadays. So it is widening over time. So thus diplomacy should be seen rather to be undertaken by officials from a wide range of domestic ministries or agencies with their foreign counterparts. Achieng, there's some background noises from your end. Will you please mute your microphone? So we are told that diplomacy should be seen rather to be undertaken by officials from a wide range of domestic ministries. For example, in the Kenyan government, we have so many ministries, maybe the Ministry of Agriculture, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the Ministry of maybe Trade. We're having so many ministries, the Ministry of Education, Security, and all that. So it can occur within a wide range, or it can be taken by officials of a wide range of domestic ministries. So maybe the Kenyan, maybe Foreign Affairs Ministry can sit down and talk over some issues with the Ethiopian government, that is Foreign Affairs Ministry. When you're talking about maybe the issue of interior, the Ministry of Interior, Kenyan government can sit together with the government of Sudan, also with the Ministry of Interior, talk about issues. So that's what you're talking about. It can be undertaken by officials from a wide range of domestic ministries or agencies with their foreign counterparts, reflecting its technical content between officials from international organizations such as the International Monetary Fund and the United Nations. So when these two are seated, for example, the Foreign Affairs of Kenya and the Foreign Affairs of Malawi, so when they're seated together, remember we have IMF in Kenya, we have IMF in Malawi. We have UN in Kenya, we have UN in Malawi. So they're very basic. So you find that they will be part, because when talking about economics, when you're talking about such things, they will have to be there, because United Nations is concerned with peace building and maybe independent issues. So you find that they have to be on the table. So let us continue. UN Secretariat or involved foreign cooperation and a host of government transnationally and with or through non-governmental organization and private individuals. So here we get to understand that within that platform of diplomacy where countries representatives sit down to negotiate, we're having organizations like IMF coming in, UN coming in, we're having non-governmental organizations coming in, we're having private individuals coming in. And remember, these people are very influential in the same. So when you're talking about non-governmental organization, let us talk about maybe UNICEF. UNICEF is in Kenya, UNICEF is in Malawi. So they'll come in together and sit and talk because they have interest on the table. When you talk about private individuals, these are influential individuals in the economy. So for example, when you talk about maybe issues about economics, you talk about those people who control the economy of a certain nation greatly. So they have to be there in that table. So we continue and say that diplomacy is an important means by which states execute policies. So these policies, they are foreign policies. So if you want to execute a policy, you must have a means, which is diplomacy. So you must be able to create a means in which you're going to execute the foreign policies. So it is mostly designed to change states to secure the target of their foreign policies by interacting with the opposite states, ideally, while not a resort to force in war. So Kenya, we have our foreign policy. Uganda, they have their own foreign policy. Tanzania, they have their foreign policy. So how are we able to execute our foreign policy? Through a platform called diplomacy. Let us sit down, let us negotiate, and with that we can be able to execute. The main purpose of this course is to acquaint the student not only about the linkage between foreign policy and diplomacy of a country, but also to teach them about and suggest that and ways. This is not correct statement. So the main purpose of this course is to acquaint the student not only about the linkages between foreign policies and diplomacy of a country, but also to teach them about suggest that and ways of achieving the aim and objective of policy through varied types of diplomacy. So we need to be able to learn how also to achieve. When you're having a certain foreign policy, how do we achieve it at the end of the day? How do you able to come up with a foreign policy and also conduct this negotiation between countries? So in conclusion, we've already discussed the various types definition of diplomacy, and also we've already understood a consul who is a consul. So those are very fundamental for this unit, because we'll be talking all through about diplomacy, diplomatic mission, consular practice. So that is why I went on. When you see the revision questions, I asked you to explain diplomacy, or to discuss, or to tell me about the definition of diplomacy according to Quincy Wright, and you're able to tell me for those who are able to discuss the other time. So that is the end of our topic 1. So, and we want you to unmute your microphone and maybe ask a question or even make a contribution. Wherever you've not understood, you can ask so that we can go back and clarify. Aswan Boaz, I can see you. You've joined the session. Are you with us?
Yes, I'm with you.
Okay, thank you, welcome. So do you have any contribution? Do you have any question about diplomacy and the consular, or who is a consul or consular practice? But we'll get deeper. You might have so many questions, but we'll get deeper as we go by.
Yes, I'm trying to look for one, but I'll just
You're trying to look
just
for a
type
question.
public
Okay.
chat.
Okay. Hilda, make a contribution or ask a question. Hilda? You can also maybe write through the public chat if you don't want to speak. Sahara, make a contribution. Somebody is contributing through the public chat. Kimemi is saying she's okay. So if I ask you, Kimemi, to define maybe diplomacy, can you please define diplomacy? Sahara, you are not, your microphone is still mute. Unmute and ask a question or make a contribution. A chain to make a contribution or ask a question. Yes, Sahara?
Like, isn't diplomacy and consular almost the same? Diplomat and consular.
Yes, it is almost the same, but you find that the position of a consular, it is lower than that of a diplomat, because a diplomat, mainly we talk of an ambassador, and here a consular is somebody who is in lesser position, because we only have one diplomat in a nation. For example, we have one diplomat from Israel to Kenya. We have one diplomat from the US to Kenya, but we can have 6 consuls from the US to Kenya. We can have 5 consuls from Kenya to the US, but you can only have one diplomat from Kenya who is an ambassador from Kenya to the US. So a consul or a
Wait, tumepoteza mwalimu.
Ameleft.
Umeniamsha, unajua.
Sahara, are we together? Aswan Boaz.
Yes, we are together.
Yes. So hope you've gotten the difference. The position of a consul is lower than that of a diplomat.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Odor Acheng is asking, there's somewhere you talked about consuls. You can mute your microphone, Sahara. Mute your microphone. Yes, Acheng is asking, there's somewhere you talked about consuls, and I didn't get it well, so I beg your pardon. So I want you, Acheng, to go back to the shared notes. It is the first thing that I was able to introduce. So a consul is an official representative of the government of one state in the territory of another, normally acting to assist and protect the citizens of the consul's own country, to facilitate trade and friendship between the people of the two countries. So you find that a consul is also an official representative. They have to be appointed officially by the Kenyan government to go and represent Kenyan government, maybe to Sudan or even to South Africa. So remember, we're talking about states now to South Africa. So you find that they have to be elected, or they have to be selected officially, and with that they go represent our nation in another territory. They represent our citizens there, they represent our own interests there, and they have to facilitate issues about trade. They have to facilitate friendship, and they are between the two countries. So you find that they are representatives, but their position is lesser than that of a diplomat. Are we together, Achien? Are we together, Achien? Achien, I'm waiting for you to reply. Are we together?
Excuse, teacher.
Yes.
Like the official definition of diplomacy. Which one
Yes.
should we use?
Or the definition of diplomacy.
Yeah.
Or you're asking because I gave so many.
Yeah.
I will prefer you use the one that you're comfortable with. You use that you're comfortable with, because, like I say, we are not going to undermine other writers. We're not going to say that let us not use this and use that. Let us use any that you're comfortable with, as long as it is a legal definition, as long as it is accepted definition. You can even use, for example, the lexicon, maybe dictionary, where you say it is management of negotiation by negotiation, as long as, and you're able to explain whereby you're talking about the use of tact, the use of intelligence and all that, and as long as it is accepted. Let me not undermine other writers, as long as it is accepted definition.
So teacher, you mean there is no like keywords like where yenye mtu anafaa atumie, like to explain diplomacy, you just use like any of these ones?
Yes, as long as it is accepted, because as one, I don't want us to undermine these writers, and they're all scholars, remember? They're all scholars. Let us not undermine. But I think the one that you're comfortable with, if you want to use the Random House Dictionary, you can say it's the conduct by government officials, whereby you're talking about negotiation of other relation between nations. The one that you're comfortable with. But remember the basic what I wanted us to understand is that diplomacy is negotiation. That is the basic understanding. It is negotiation. So when it comes to defining diplomacy, use a definition that you're comfortable with, and don't undermine any scholar. Don't undermine any scholar here.
Why can't you say it's a representation?
Yes,
Why can't you use representation?
diplomacy.
Since we are being represented in other countries, our interests. For example,
Yes,
Kenya.
it is representation, because when you're managing that that negotiation, you are representing a state. That's why when you talk about, let us look at here at a certain definition. For example, Adam Watson, he says that diplomatic dialogue is the instrument of international society, a civilized process based on awareness and respect for different people's purpose and view. So you find that when you're engaging in this negotiation, you're representing. Remember, there is no way all of us Kenyans, we can go to the US and negotiate. We have to send an ambassador. We have to send an envoy. We have to send a non-governmental organization to negotiate on our behalf. So we find that it is all about representation. And when you're going to look at the roles or the functions of diplomacy, you're going to find that we're having representation as one of the roles, which is very, very basic. They have to represent Kenya. They have to represent our interests. So you find that representation is very, very basic. Yes, as one, Boaz. Are we together?
As we together.
Yes. So representation is very basic. Just find a definition that is going to work for you.
Okay.
Yes. Any other person? In the public chat, I see somebody chatting. Aswan Boaz, you're saying, okay, madam. Achieng, are we together? Because I was able to go back and discuss who a consul is. Achieng, are we together? Yes. I want to see your response either from the public chat or even you unmute your microphone. So if we are all good, if you are all good with that topic introduction, it is just introduction part where we have to understand the definition of who a consul is and who a diplomat is. We started our class late. You joined in late than I expected. So I would like us to move on to topic 2. I would like us to move on to topic 2, if we are all okay, so that we're able to cover topic 2. The next time we're going to cover topic 3 and maybe topic 4. Let us move on to topic 2. And topic 2, we're talking about the nature of diplomacy. The nature of diplomacy. The nature of diplomacy. So many people have are leaving. I don't know what is the problem. Is it connection? So we are moving to topic 2. And I'm sharing the notes here. So just a little bit you'll be able to see. So I'm sharing the notes on the nature of diplomacy. And I remember I asked you this question somewhere in the discussion forum to tell me more about the nature of diplomacy. So we can begin talking about the nature of diplomacy. People are leaving. I don't know what is the problem. Is it connection problem? Acheng is not here. Rita is not here, and they were here earlier. Ask them to join in again, so that we can talk, we can move on to our topic too. For Aswan, Boaz, Kimemi, Hilda, and Sahara, could you please write something on the public chat if you are still together? Aswan, Boaz, it's okay. Kimemi, Hilda, Sahara. And will you please ask Acheng and Rita to be back, because our class has not ended. So let us look at the nature of diplomacy. So the nature of diplomacy. So let us look at the introduction part. The interests of nation states are articulated taking many factors into consideration, such factors like economic needs and resources, geography, defense requirement, and strategies, existing alliances with other states, and many factors in foreign policy are taken into consideration. So we are told that the interests of nation states are articulated in many factors. So, for example, the interest of the Kenyan nation or the interest of the Sudan nation is articulating many factors into consideration. And we're talking like the factors like economic needs. What economic needs do Kenyan government need so that they get into a relation to another state? And also, you're talking about geography. Where is Kenya located? Is it in Africa? Is it in maybe Asia? So you find that you have to talk about geography. Defense requirement. Do we have enough defense on our side? So, and maybe other strategies. For example, existing alliances with other states. Which alliances does Kenya have? So these are going to consider the issue of foreign policy. So when you want to engage in foreign policy, you have to consider this. However, the success of foreign policy of a nation state depends on the nature of diplomacy. So the success of foreign policy, remember, a policy is a written document. It is a written document whereby we have people who are expertise on the same area able to write the same document. So when you're talking about foreign policy, a written document which guides relation between states, foreign policy. So when we're talking about the success of that foreign policy depends on the nature of diplomacy. So if the nature of diplomacy is good, so that means we're going to have success in the foreign policy. It could be said that while foreign policy is concerned with substance and contents of external relations across the national boundaries, diplomacy is concerned with the methodology of implementation. So foreign policy is concerned with substance and content of the document. What is within that document? So substance and content. If the substance is okay, if the content is okay, So this, the success will depend also with the diplomacy, which is the methodology. Which methodology are you going to use so that you are able to execute your foreign policy? So we can see now the difference. Foreign policy is about the substance and content, and you find that diplomacy is about the methodology of executing the foreign policy here. So under the nature, let us start by this scholar called Joseph Stalin, quoted in Darlin 1944, that is page 71, had paid his respect to the art of diplomacy in these words. So a diplomat's words must have no relations to actions, otherwise what kind of diplomacy is it? Words are one thing, actions are another. Good words or a mask for the concealment of unhealthy deeds. Sincere diplomacy is no more possible than dry water of wooden iron. Stalin, in the quotation, expressed the traditional attitudes of modern dictators towards diplomacy, namely that it is a means of concealing a nation's real aims and of providing smoke screen for actions of vastly different character. So, according to Stalin, he said that diplomats' words must have no relation to actions. So this is according to Stalin, where he says that words are another thing and action is another thing. You might be able to say words and not act upon them. So you must be able to say and act at the same time. So we continue. We're only having two people, Aswan, Boaz, and Sahara. People are leaving. I don't know what is the problem. Is it a connection problem? Because I see Achieng coming in and out. Hilda has left. Rita is no more. And also, who else has left? So Joseph Stalin, in short, took a cynical view of art of diplomacy. It is, in truth, the normal means of conducting international relations. In itself, diplomacy, like any machinery, is both neither moral nor immoral. Its use and value depends upon the intention and the abilities of those who practice it. So you find that here we find the first nature of diplomacy according to Joseph Stalin. He said that it is neither moral nor immoral. So it is neither bad or good. It depends on those who use it. It depends upon the intentions and the abilities of those who practice diplomacy. It is neither bad, it is neither good, because it depends upon the values of those who practice or the intentions of those who practice it. So we're going to list those. I'm going to give you another document so that we see it listed. So we continue. Diplomacy functions through a labyrinth of foreign offices, embassies, legations, consulates, and special missions all over the world. So you find that diplomacy is going to function under those offices. We're having embassies, we're having legations, consulates, and special missions all over the world. There is nowhere else you can be able to practice diplomacy. It's only maybe through embassies, through legations, through consulates, special missions. So that is where you're going to practice it. It is ordinarily bilateral in character. So that is another thing that we have to understand. So the second feature, we've come to understand that it can only function through the foreign offices. So that is another nature. It can only function through foreign offices. And you can give examples like legations, consulates, embassies, and special missions. The third nature is that it is bilateral in nature or in character. It is bilateral in character, whereby bilateral meaning two states. So it occurs between states. So it is bilateral in character. But as a result of the growing importance of international conference, international organization, religion, arrangements, and collective security measures, its multilateral aspect have become increasingly significant. So we are told that it is bilateral in character, But since we're having growing importance of international conferences, of international organization, of regional arrangements and collective security measures, so it now tends to be multilateral in its character too. So because we're having increased interest or importance of international conferences, international organizations, regional arrangements, and collective security measures. So it takes the form of multilateral aspect. So it may embrace a large number of interests, from the best matter of detail within the relation between two states to very important problems with war and peace. When it breaks down the danger of war, or a minimum of a serious crisis is real. So that is the third. We found the third nature, where we're talking about it's bilateral. At the same time, it is multilateral, since we're having growing importance of whatever we've listed already. So another nature is that the breakdown of diplomacy, it can lead to the danger of a crisis, which is war. The breakdown of diplomacy can lead to a crisis, which is war, the danger of war. So when there's breakdown of diplomacy, when diplomacy does not yield fruits, there can be a danger of war, which is a real crisis. So we continue. So nation states deal bilaterally with one another and meet together in multilateral organizations. Not only they have interests in common, but also because they have interests which conflict. That is another nature, or another nature of diplomacy that we found. So since nation states deal bilaterally, so Kenya and Uganda, they deal bilaterally with one another, but they meet in multilateral organizations. So not only because they have interest. Remember, when Kenya and Uganda meet in multilateral platforms, not only do we have interest, but sometimes we have conflicting issues. So for example, the issue of Migingo, we all have interest in the same, but we might have another issue where we are conflicting. We're having conflicting interests. So that is another nature. It occurs wherever we're having maybe common interest and also conflicting interest. So that is another nature. Moreover, the fact of independence breeds suspicion and doubts. History is full of examples of conflict, duplicity, and reversals of policy, and everyday fresh examples are emerging. So diplomacy is intimately concerned with these problems and is therefore viewed as an organized pattern of communication and negotiation which enables each independent state to learn from what also objects to. So you find that another nature of diplomacy. So you're saying that it is concerned with problems, and like we said, it is an organized pattern of communication. Since people sit down, countries send representatives, they sit down in a platform. So we're talking about organized pattern of communication and negotiation, which enables independent states to learn from what is also object to. So you learn from the other country, you learn from their tactic, you learn from maybe their weak point, you learn from their strengths. So you find that that is another nature of diplomacy. In modern international societies, diplomacy has become more than an instrument of communication and bargaining. So it is more of, it is in today's society, modern international societies, diplomacy has become more than an instrument of communication and bargaining. It is associate degree activity that, even if often abused, has a bias towards the resolution of conflict. Some leading diplomats and specialists have used the word diplomacy as the practice of international legal principles and norms in international relations. Diplomacy, with its ever-increasing intricate modalities, techniques in all fields of human activities in contemporary period, has transformed itself into well-organized scientific discipline, and its effectiveness in international politics cannot be overstated. emphasized. So when you go back up there, we're told that in modern international societies, diplomacy has become more than just an instrument of communication and bargaining. It is more than that. It takes more than just an instrument of bargaining and communicating, because in that platform it is not only about bargaining, it is not only about communication. So many functions take place within the same. So we are going to see those later. Because they focus more on resolution of conflict and they focus more of deterring war from occurring. So instead of Kenya engaging in war with Tanzania because we closed our borders just the other day, what do? Let us have our ambassadors sitting down. Let us have non-governmental organizations which are sent to represent us sitting down. Let us have consuls sit down and talk. Let us have the foreign agencies sitting down also talking about the issue. So let us go further. So to talk about foreign policy and diplomacy. So we are told that it is necessary to bear in mind that there is a defined distinction between foreign policy and diplomacy. So here we are going to see a distinction, the difference between foreign policy and diplomacy. So the foreign policy of a state, according to Charles 1948, page 64, is the substance of foreign relations, whereas diplomacy is the process by which foreign policy is carried out. So we see the first distinction. Foreign policy, according to Charles, is a substance. And remember, we talked about it being a substance and content of foreign relations, substance and content, whereas diplomacy is the process by which this foreign policy is carried out. So it is the process, it is the instrument in which you're going to carry out the foreign policy. So it is the process. So you're already having foreign policy, you're already having the document. How do you carry out the document? So you have to find diplomacy, which is now the process. We go further. Policy is made by different persons and agencies, but presumably on major matters in any state, whatever its form of government. It is made at the highest level, though subject to many different kinds of control. Then it's the aim of diplomacy to produce the machinery. So we are told that this foreign policy is made by different persons or agencies of the state. So it is made by different persons and agencies of the state, while on the other side, diplomacy produces a machinery and also the personnel by that policy is did. So diplomacy is going to provide the machinery. It is going to provide the personnel who are going to be in that platform, because diplomacy is going to tell us that we want an ambassador, we want so and so to be in this platform. So you find that foreign policy is on the other side is being formed, or it is being made by different persons or agencies in the state. But on the other hand, diplomacy produces a machinery and also the personnel. Personnel are those who are going to work or who are going to execute the foreign policy. Let us go further. One of the most astute students and practitioners of diplomacy on the 20th century, Harold Nicolson, is particularly insistent on calling attention to this distinction. However, in some cases, his efforts to be very precise in this matter seem to raise further questions. For example, in his interesting study, The Congress of Vienna, a study in Alien Unity, 1964, Nicolson wrote, "It is useful, even when dealing with remote historical episode, to consider wherever diplomacy ends and policy begins. Each of them is with the adjustment of national to international interest. Foreign policy relies upon a general conception of national requirements." Let us go further. Diplomacy, on the opposite hand, is not an end but a means, not a purpose but a method. So according to this guy is called Nicolson. He was able to he's like he wants to prove whatever he wanted to say because he had his own argument, or he wanted to bring about the distinction. So he says that diplomacy he wants to have a difference whereby diplomacy and foreign policy, where does it end and where does it begin? So you find that diplomacy is a means in which you achieve foreign policy. According to him, it is a means in which you achieve foreign policy. So diplomacy is not an end. So it is a means. It is a method in which you're able to achieve foreign policy at the end of the day. So this is according to him. He was able to come up with such. So let us continue. It seeks by the use of reason, conciliation, and the exchange of interest to prevent major conflict arising between sovereign states. It seeks by the agency through which foreign policy seeks to attain its purpose by agreement rather than by war. So according to him, he says that diplomacy seeks by use of reason, conciliation, and exchange of interest to prevent conflict, which is very true. When you have that table, you seek by means of reason, whereby a Kenyan ambassador to the US is going to sit down with other ambassadors and reason and exchange interest, and also prevent major war from occurring. So it is a method in which you're going to stop or to prevent war from occurring. And with that method, you're going to attain your purpose. You're going to attain your purpose through agreement rather than war. So you're going to agree in that method of diplomacy rather than engaging in war. So thus, once agreement becomes not possible, diplomacy, which is the instrument of peace, becomes inoperative, and foreign policy, the final sanction of which is war alone, becomes operative. So he also says that once diplomacy becomes inoperative, the final sanction, which is war alone, becomes operative. So you sit down with your brother. Let us take, for example, two brothers sit down. They cannot agree on a table. So the only way is maybe engaging in war so that they can decide who is the winner. So whenever diplomacy is inoperative, war becomes operative. So the last sentence of the above quotation tends to destroy the nice distinction between diplomacy and foreign policy, which Nicolson has made, and it is misleading in that it suggests that diplomacy ceases to function when major international war arises, especially if they lead to war. The object of diplomacy as of foreign policy is to protect the security of a nation by peaceful means, if possible, but by giving every assistance to the military operation if war cannot be avoided. So you find that that is what is believed, that it is misleading. But I believe that it is not misleading because it is the truth. If diplomacy cannot function, what arises is war, because diplomacy is mainly focusing on peace. But if it does not operate, so you find that war comes in, and also you find that governments which have got they've got maybe we're talking about they give assistance to those who they're allied to those who they are close to. For example, maybe the international organization, you give assistance to the country in which you are allied to. We continue. Remember, we're talking about Nicolson's argument. So diplomacy does not cease to function, as Nicolson suggests, in time of war, although it necessarily plays a different role. In wartime, it works of the work of diplomats as foreign ministers may even expand. The diplomacy of the two world wars of the century provides convincing support for this competition. Diplomatic agents play a significant role in the formulation of foreign policy, particularly through periodic reports, which they send to the foreign offices relating to the affairs and interests of the sending state in the countries to which they are accredited. These reports become inputs or raw materials through which foreign policy is formulated. So we're going to look at the role somewhere after we're going looking at the functions of foreign policy, of diplomacy, sorry. So with that, we're having reporting as one of the roles. So even during wartime, it's not that diplomats have stopped working. They keep on reporting. They keep on writing reports to their nation states, giving them on the occurrence, what is happening, and even they can start formulating other foreign policy. Remember, because the foreign policy they had failed, so they start formulating other foreign policies, and they keep on writing reports to their government. The importance of diplomacy and diplomatic agents in the formulation of foreign policy is pointed out by Francois de Calif. Thus, while the final responsibility for all success or failure in diplomacy would seem to rest upon the king and his ministers at home, it is nonetheless true that since these ministries can only act upon information from abroad, the influence. Sorry, just a minute. So we come to understand that the importance of diplomacy and diplomatic agents in the formulation of foreign policy is pointed out by Francois de Calif. Thus, while the final responsibility for all success or failure of diplomacy will seem to rest upon the king and his ministers at home, it is nonetheless true that since these ministers can only act upon information from abroad, the influence which an enlightened diplomat can exercise upon the actions and design of the home government is very, very large. So when you're sent as a diplomat to another state, you rely upon the information from home. So you don't make your own decisions. And also, you're the one to influence decisions made from home. So because you're the one in that platform, you get information, that information you share with the president, you share with other ministries, so they can be able to make decision out of the information that you give. And when they make that decision, they tell you what to do in that country or you're representing. So therefore, also your aptitude or your ability is also very important in this, that you're talking about using tact, using intelligence in the same when you're engaging in diplomatic mission. So therefore, the responsibility for diplomatic action is in reality shared about equal degrees between the home government and its servants abroad. So when diplomacy fails, you share this responsibility equally between the home government and the government and its servants abroad. So because you're sent to represent Kenya in the US and diplomacy failed, so you share the responsibility equally between the home government and those who represent Kenya abroad. Because you were sent because we believed that you had the intelligence, you had the tact, you had the skills, and you're the one to report issues back home. So when it fails, you share the two because you are given a directives from the government home, and also you're supposed to engage your intelligence and all that. What the above quotation suggests is that for a state to succeed in relations with other states, a sound and harmonious combination of competent diplomacy and pragmatic foreign policy is very, very necessary. So for diplomacy to succeed, for a state to succeed, you must have a good combination of diplomacy and foreign policy. So for Kenya government to succeed in its diplomatic mission, you must have a good combination of foreign policy, which is the substance and content, and diplomacy, which is the instrument. And remember, we're talking about also the personnel whom we are sending to work in that instrument. So you find that we must have a good combination of the two. So in conclusion, it could therefore be said that while foreign policy is concerned with substance and content of international relations across the national boundaries, diplomacy is primarily concerned with the methodology for implementing the foreign policy. So while we know that foreign policy is concerned with the substance and content, on the other side, diplomacy is concerned with the methodology. It is concerned with the instrument in which you execute foreign policy. Diplomacy is not a policy, but the agency for giving effect to policy. So hope we are still together. Diplomacy is not a policy, remember, it is not a policy, but agency for giving effect to the policy. So you're already having a policy, but now you want to execute. So it is an agency to be able to effect the policy. So both are complementary to each other. You cannot have diplomacy and you don't have foreign policy. So they have to complement. So you have diplomacy and you have foreign policy. They complement one another. So diplomacy has no separate existence from foreign policy, but the two together form one executive policy, foreign policy determining the strategy, and diplomacy the tactics. So they complement one another. The way you cannot have a head without a brain, so they complement one another. You cannot maybe move. You cannot maybe move from your house to town without having a means to move. So they complement each other, just like the parts of our body, the hands, the legs, the eyes. So they complement. So you find that that is foreign policy and diplomacy, and trying to look at the nature of diplomacy. So if you have any question, you can unmute your microphone and ask as I post a simplified nature of diplomacy. As I post a simplified nature of diplomacy. Aswan, Boaz, and Sahara, you're the only people in the group, so be active. Let us so that we finish.
Madam, what are the agents of the diplomacy?
What are they?
Who are the agents?
Yes, you're asking me who are the agents of diplomacy. Okay, Aswan, Boaz, you're asking who are the agents of diplomacy. So in that is like you're asking those people who work in the diplomatic mission. Is it true? Those people work in the diplomatic mission. Is it the same question?
Yes, like it's kinda is, but it's not really. I'm not asking about them, like the ambassadors and such.
Yes.
Diplomatic agents.
Diplomatic agents. So I will answer you in this form. The agents of diplomacy are those people who work in the embassy. And those people who work in the embassy, for example, the president or the head of the embassy is an ambassador. Is it true?
Yes.
Yes. So you find that the head of a diplomatic mission is an ambassador, because they are the representative of a nation to another state. So we're having an ambassador, we're having a consul. And like I said, a consul is a lesser position than that of an ambassador, because you can have 5 consuls in Kenya from the US, but you have one ambassador from US to Kenya. So we are having one ambassador, but maybe several consuls. We're also having non-governmental organization. They can send in their representative. Like I said, we're having IMF in Kenya, we're having IMF in the US. So since we're talking about economic, diplomacy, we're talking about economic negotiation, we can have an IMF representative from US and an IMF representative from Kenya. We're also talking about individuals. And I remember asking you this question another time in class. Who is the richest man maybe in Africa? Who is the richest man in Africa?
Aliko Dangote.
You remember he contributes much to the economy of Africa. So this individual can be part of the discussion, because he contributes much to the economy, he can be part. So that's what we're talking about: individuals, non-governmental organization, international organization. We're talking about maybe the consuls, we're talking about the ambassador, we're talking about members in the foreign ministry. For example, you can have the head of the foreign ministry being part of this negotiation. So they could be agents, because if we are talking about, maybe it is the Ministry of Agriculture, it is the issue about agriculture, we'll have representatives from the Ministry of Agriculture. So they are not always the same. They differ depending on what is being negotiated on the table. If it is issue about security, we'll have the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Interior, and the Ministry of Interior. They send their representative to represent Kenya in that. We also have a representative from Foreign Affairs. We have other representatives. So it is diverse. It is diverse, but the basic, we must have an ambassador or a representative from that mission. We must have consulates, because they have tactics and they have the characteristics which are really needed in that platform. Are we together?
Yes, we're
Can you
together.
use? Yes.
Can you use a foreign policy, like a policy, to act as an agent without necessarily having a representative in another country? Like, here diplomacy is about representations and negotiations. So
Yes.
use your policies here to impose interests in other countries without necessarily having representatives.
So what you're saying that remember, diplomacy, like we said, it is a platform which we're talking about negotiation. It is a platform where negotiation takes place. So when this negotiation is taking place, how will you use only foreign policy without having representatives? Because these representatives are the one to execute, because the policy is a document, foreign policy is a document. A policy is a document, and foreign, it is a document that governs relation between states. So when you're having this document, can you send only a document to a table without representatives as one ball? So you must have representatives to take this document, and this document they want to execute in a diplomacy. That is now an instrument whereby they have to sit down and negotiate and say, this is our foreign policy, that is your foreign policy. Can we negotiate? Can we negotiate to come to a conclusion or to come to an agreement? So you'll use foreign policy in that platform, whereby you're having representatives.
Okay.
Sahara? Okay, thank you. Sahara? So we can go further. Sahara, you're not speaking. Unmute your microphone and say something. You can contribute. So further, we can go.
I have posted on the public chat. I have posted on the public chat.
Okay, let me see. How can diplomacy operate both in time of peace and war? So in time of peace, Sahara, are we together? So for example, Kenya, right now we are in peace with so many countries. For example, let's say Uganda, we are in peace. So it can operate during time of peace, whereby we want to execute something. We want to execute something, and we just bring it on table to negotiate. We are not at war. We are not at war. We want to execute, maybe it is a trade policy. We want to execute if it is maybe any other policy that we have. So we just come in. We are not fighting. We are not fighting, and we are having maybe similar interests. Maybe we want to, it is issue about trade, and we want to say we want to have maybe, what can we say, free entry and exit of goods. That is just an example. Let us sit down and negotiate. Remember, we are not fighting, but we are at peace. But we want to improve maybe on the policies. We want to improve on our trade. We want to improve on our relation. So That is during peace. And during war is that when we're having conflicting interests and already war tends to occur, we can sit down. We can sit down. For example, Kenya is fighting with Uganda over something. So we can sit down during times of war to bring about peace or even to stop the war. Because when you're fighting, Kenya and Uganda, you're fighting, that is war already. And we need to bring an end to this war. So we can sit down during times of war, end the war, negotiate, agree, because we have to do something. Remember, we are under the African Union. Maybe they'll compel us to sit down and talk because they may find it difficult either to support Kenya or Uganda. So we'll be compelled to sit down and talk during war and also during peace. So that is how it works. Are we together?
Yes.
Yes. So during peace, you might be, for example, you and your brother during time that you don't have any issues, you can just sit down and talk over something. Maybe start a business, maybe do something to improve on your on maybe your economic standards. But also during times of war, you can sit down and negotiate and say, this is not working well for us. What can we do during this time of conflict? So it is the same. It works during peace and during times of war. Evelyn Jerry, I can see you've gotten into the platform. Evelyn Jerry. Okay, so I've posted something down there. I want you to see where we're talking about the nature of diplomacy in point form, where we're saying the first point is that diplomacy is not immoral. Like I said, it is not bad. It is not bad. Whereby there's no lies, there's no deceit, there's no lies, whereby it is not immoral because we are sitting down either to improve on our trade, we are sitting down either to stop war, so it is not immoral. Number two, diplomacy is bilateral, like you said, and as well as multilateral. It is bilateral where we're having two states, and it is multilateral because we can sit down together on bigger platforms, whereby we're talking about international conferences. We can sit down and talk. We can sit down whereby you're having regional negotiations. So we can sit down in bigger platform as well as only between two states. Also, we're told that diplomacy tests success of diplomacy. Success in diplomacy is measured in terms of the amount of success achieved towards fulfillment of the goals. So remember, success, when you achieve your goals, that means you're successful. When you don't achieve, you're not. So you test success of a diplomacy when you've achieved the goals, or you've worked towards your goals to the end. To the end, you fulfilled your goals to the end. So diplomacy is backed by national power. That is very true. So in that process of negotiation, it is backed by national power. The Kenyan government is going to back its representative in that platform. So we are going to back that person with by giving them privileges, advantages, giving them information, so that they can be able to negotiate well. So diplomacy is backed by national power. When you're sending an ambassador to another state, we back them up, and that is we back them up. We go further. So diplomacy works in an environment characterized by both conflict and cooperation. So as states or countries interact, conflict and cooperation are inevitable. So we are told that as countries interact, conflict and cooperation are inevitable. So there'll be time we'll be cooperating. There'll be time we'll be having conflict. So some host countries may be friendly, while others may may be in conflict with the native land. But all in all, existence of both cooperation and conflict make diplomacy possible, as there will be no need of diplomacy if all states or countries are friendly. And on the other hand, negotiation will be quite impossible if only conflict prevails. So we're told that it works in environment where we have cooperation and conflict. And we're told that if we only had cooperation, there'll be no need of diplomacy. And if we only had also conflict, it will be very hard for us to engage in negotiation. So it works well in both environment where we're having cooperation and conflict. Diplomacy is the art of conducting negotiation, is the art of conducting negotiation with other states of the world so as to remove or narrow down the areas of disagreement and misunderstanding, and thereby maintaining good relations as far as possible. So why do we need diplomacy? Even that is what we're given here. The reason is the art of conducting negotiation with other states of the world so that we remove or we narrow down the areas of disagreement. Why do people negotiate? To reduce the disagreement or misunderstanding. So that is another nature of diplomacy. So these negotiations are conducted to protect and promote nations' interests. So that is the main reason why we're conducting negotiation, to promote or to protect national interest. Another nature, maintenance of the peace without injuring the interest of the state, is a major objective of diplomacy. So another nature is that we conduct negotiation without injuring the interests of the state. So let us negotiate and don't injure the interests of Kenya state, don't injure the interests of maybe the Ugandan state. So diplomacy is applied form of foreign policy. Hence, there should be no conflict or contradiction between what the foreign policy makers affirm and what the professional diplomats do. So diplomacy is the applied form of foreign policy. So it is a place where you apply now the foreign policy. It is applied form of foreign policy, because without diplomacy, you cannot apply foreign policy, because they work together, they complement one another. So modern diplomacy is closely related to the state system. It is inseparable bound to interstate representation. So we are told that it is closely related to the state system. It is inseparably bound to interstate representation. So it is interstate representation. Kenya is being represented Uganda. Uganda is being represented here in Kenya. Kenya is being represented in Sudan. Sudan is being represented. So interstate representation. So we continue. Diplomacy is a key concept in world politics. It refers to a process of communication and negotiation between state and other international actors. So in the world politics, without diplomacy, there is no way even countries can agree. So you have to negotiate, you have to communicate through diplomacy as a platform. Diplomacy began in the ancient world but took and recognizably modern form from the 15th century onwards with the establishment of the permanent embassy. So the nature of diplomacy in the current world, we're talking about permanent embassies. And this is, for example, the embassies that are built here in Kenya. When you talk about the US embassy in Kenya, is a permanent embassy. It is something that is there to stay, because we are having an ambassador here in Kenya. And even if that the term of that ambassador ends, we are going to have another ambassador from the US to Kenya. So it is permanent embassy, permanent representation. That is what we're having in the current world. So by the end of the 19th century, all states had a network of embassies linked to foreign departments at home. Diplomacy had also become an established profession. So this is just maybe for us to understand. So it started in the 15th century, but now in the 19th century, all states had a network of embassies abroad linked to foreign departments. So many states during the 19th century had foreign departments, whereby we are talking about embassies at home. So where you're having an embassy, yeah, in most countries. So you can imagine how many representatives around the world that Kenya has. We are having so many. You can list. There are many, and even you cannot even maybe complete the list because there are many. But let us continue. So diplomacy plays a key role in foreign policies of states and other international actors. So it is very true. It plays a key role in foreign policies because, like I said, without diplomacy, there's no way you're going to execute foreign policy. A diplomatic machinery. So diplomacy is a diplomatic machinery, minimally a foreign department and overseas representation may be highly developed or fundamentally depending upon the actor, but it performs important functions in the making and the implementation of foreign policy. So it is a machinery, it is a platform, it is an instrument which is being used in international relations when implementing this foreign policy. Diplomacy involves persuading other actors to do or not to do what you want, them to do. To be effective, diplomacy may need to be supplemented by other instruments by negotiating skills and central to other art of diplomacy. So during this negotiation, you persuade other actors to do what you want them to do. So persuasion is also a skill that you need to have to persuade the other actor to do what you want them to do or not to do what you don't want them to do. So you only persuade. So persuasion is a skill which you're going to see by looking at the skills diplomats need to have. Diplomacy combined with other instruments, military, economic, etc., is called mixed diplomacy. Here, diplomacy becomes a communication channel through which the use of threatened use of other instruments is transmitted to other parties. So lastly, we are told that diplomacy combined with other instruments, for example, military, economics, is called mixed diplomacy. And you also find that diplomacy becomes now an instrument, becomes a means of communication or a channel of communication. So that negotiation becomes a channel because, for example, all of us Kenyans, we were not in that table and we had our representative in that table. So it acts as a channel of communication whereby this representative they'll have to tell Kenyans what they negotiated. They have to communicate with the president, and the president, the Kenyans will be able to understand what was able to be communicated in that round table. So that is the end of diplomatic mission and consular practice, and that is the introduction part and the nature of diplomacy. So any question before we end? Any question? So if Swan, Boaz, and Sahara, if there is none, could we say yes? You have a question, Boaz?
No, I don't.
Okay, so hope you've understood, but you can go through the notes later for you to have better understanding about the nature, whereby we're talking about it is not immoral. It works in an environment characterized by both conflict and cooperation and all that. Go through it for better understanding. Rita, you are coming in now and we're ending our class. Yes.
There was the lights have gone and there was a problem with the connection.
Okay,
So
okay.
I
But
didn't have the Wi-Fi.
Okay, no problem. We understand that. Remember, we are working from home. Evelyn, Jerry, you're just getting in also now, and we're ending our class. Evelyn, Jerry, where are you? Why haven't you been in class? Evelyn, I want you to speak. Evelyn, Jerry. So if we cannot be able to get her, we can end our class there for today. Thank you for attending, because I'm going to take the attendance. I'm going to mark the attendance. So I don't know who have been in and out. What am I going to do with them? Because they've been in and out. They've not completed the class. They've not given in the reasons why they are not able to join the session. But thank you for your participation. we can stop there for today. Have a good weekend till we meet next week.
Okay, Sam.
Okay.